Okay, we can go ahead and get started. So, as Dean said, my name is Lydia Bailey, and I am so honored to be with you this morning. It's such a privilege to be here at this conference and just be a part of all of the truly rich discussion around what it means to be in this work together. So, here's what you can expect from today. We're going to be exploring the following questions. What is a wounded healer? What happens if we don't tend to our wounds? How can we tend to our wounds? And what is hospitality of the heart? So I brought together meditations of different writings and images. I have a hard time sometimes with kind of dense theological texts, and so I'm very much a story and images kind of person that sort of communicates things in different modalities. So we're going to have meditations that are kind of incorporating those. We're going to have time for a small group and whole group. So I'm really going to be relying on all of you to participate and be part of this discussion. I'm a big believer in that we kind of come to know the truth in dialogue together, right? And we need that, so I'm going to be incorporating that. And I thank you in advance for your contributions. But before we jump in any further, I'm going to take a leaf out of Dr. Albert Rossi's book and invite us to have a moment of silence together. So, if you would join with me in a moment of silence. Just in the silence, I'm going to be encouraging you to just be aware of the presence of God with you in this moment. So, that might mean you're repeating the Jesus prayer, that might mean you're repeating part of a song, it might just mean tuning into your body, noticing on the deep inhale and the exhale. So, you're going to go ahead and start that moment now. And as we just kind of start coming back together, noticing the sound of my voice, some of the colors in the room, noticing people around you. And just taking a second to acknowledge, if you will, is your attention and your presence different than it was right when you walked in this room? Is the quality of your attention different? So, I promise that was not just so that I could take a deep breath. All right, question number 1. What is a wounded healer? Okay, so the idea of a wounded healer, of one who is in a healing profession, who is themselves wounded, is not a new idea. So as early as antiquity, there's this Greek myth of a centaur named Chiron. One interesting fact is that I found out that the English word for surgery actually derives from this word. And Chiron was a master of the healing arts, according to this myth, according to this legend. He was wounded by a poisonous arrow and suffered greatly from that wound. And even though he was such an experienced healer, he couldn't actually heal himself of that wound. And part of why he was so good at being a master healer was because he had this personal lived experience of that pain and that suffering and that wounding. Plato in Plato's Republic, and then much later Carl Jung, also kind of described this theme of doctors who have themselves experienced illness, have lived experiences of illness, actually tend to be the best healers. That even though, even if you're sick or you've experienced weakness, that something about having that lived experience is part of what enriches and enables you to truly do this work. For the purposes of today, I'm going to be drawing a lot on Henry Nouwen's work. Now, how many folks know Henry Nouwen? Okay, some folks don't. Henry Nouwen was a Catholic priest, but I think he's very orthodox in the sense of just some of the ways that he shares about what it is to be a human being and be connecting with those that we serve. So his work, The Wounded Healer, Ministry in Contemporary Society, from 1972, is the text that I'm kind of pulling from and organizing this presentation around, and then bringing in orthodox sources from ancient church fathers as well as more contemporary sources, including Father Stephen Muse, who we just heard from, to kind of structure this dialogue and conversation. So, according to Nouwen, a wounded healer is a Christian minister who tends to their wounds and allows their wounds to become a source of life and healing to others. This artwork from Art of Marza, I have this sticker on my dash. I commute an hour one way to work, and it's a grounding kind of image that reminds me that to not walk into this setting with a hard heart, right? Especially with the juvenile justice population, as you can imagine, there's a lot of intensity, a lot of trauma, and I have to have my A game when I walk in, and what that means is I have to make sure that, I'm prayerfully asking God to help me have a heart of flesh, help me not have a hard heart walking into this setting so that I can truly have that healing encounter with my clients. So, taking it a step further, Jesus Christ is our wounded healer. And so, I'd like to offer a couple of a scripture and then as well as a quote from St. Gregory Nazianzen. So Isaiah 53:5 says, "He was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." And again, St. Gregory Nazianzen, "He was weak and wounded, but he cures all infirmity and all weakness. He was nailed to the wood and lifted up, but he restores us by the tree of life. He dies, but he brings to life, and by his own death destroys death. He is buried, but he rises again." And that's as quoted in Olivier Clément's The Roots of Christian Mysticism. So, my spiritual father, Father John Ballard, preached a sermon on the Sunday of the veneration of the precious and life-giving cross, which we celebrate during Great Lent, that still sticks with me. This was a couple years ago, and in it, he talks about the story in Exodus of the bitter water at Marah. And so the Israelites are complaining against Moses because the water is bitter. They're very thirsty, they can't, they want to drink, but it's not good for drinking, it's bitter. And God tells Moses he shows him a piece of wood, and Moses throws it in the water, and the water turns sweet. And Father John talks about how this is a prefiguration of the cross, that the cross turns our suffering into something sweet, into something meaningful, and that's part of why it's placed right in the middle of Great Lent, to encourage us as we are on this ascetical labor towards God, that our suffering is not in vain. The cross is what turns it into something sweet and turns it into something meaningful. And so there's this idea of kenosis, of this great self-emptying of Christ, which is really exemplified in this passage from Philippians, which is that Christ, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And so this great mystery of our faith, right, that our God humbles himself, is born of a virgin in a stable, walks as a man in our world, assumes everything that it is to be human, and then humbles himself through the cross, through this terribly painful, torturous way to die. And so Father Stephen Freeman says this beautifully, that central to Christ's suffering and death is an understanding that these are not simply events that brought about our salvation, they're also revelatory events. The fullness of who Christ is and his making known the Father to the world are not fully accomplished until his death on the cross and his rising from the tomb. So we may say, as has been said before, that kenosis is theosis, that is, self-emptying is the path to divine likeness. And so theosis, that idea that we are made in the image of God and we are transformed into his likeness, that's the goal of our lives as Christians. How we do that is by kenosis, is by self-emptying, by the very wounds and suffering that we go through. we have the opportunity to transform those sufferings so that we become more in the likeness of Christ. And as I said, and for those of you who struggle, then I love stories, and I need stories to like bring the theology to me and kind of in words that I can understand. And so, kind of a couple of stories that help me wrestle with this reality. One is the story of Loris by Eugene Vodolazkin. And this is one of my top 5 favorite books, I think, maybe in my top 3. Has anyone read this?
I have it on my shelf.
I love this book, and I hope that you will all go read it. It's so beautiful. So this is a fictional story of the life of a village healer. His name is Arseny, or that's how his name starts. I won't give too much away. And it's set in medieval Russia. And Arseny experiences an agonizing loss early in his life that then, at first he is so distressed, so overcome with grief that he wishes he could die because he just wants it to end and he just wants to be with the one he's lost. And after speaking with the abbot, the abbot tells him and instructs him to use this experience to then minister to others, to pray, to fast, to have a life of repentance. And so that's what Arseny does, and he becomes a holy fool and heals many, many people through his ministry. So he's previously acquainted with the healing arts, and then whenever he experiences that, it deepens the work for him. Another way that I like to think about this for myself, of kind of being a wounded healer myself or endeavoring to become that through God's grace, another way we can think about it is by this idea of becoming real. So, who's read The Velveteen Rabbit? Okay, another great book. This one is much shorter. It's a very dear children's story about this sweet little stuffed rabbit, the Velveteen Rabbit, and he's in this boy's Christmas stocking, and it tells the story of his life as a toy in the nursery, and he's getting to know all the mechanical toys who have all these screws and whatever you use to wind up, and he doesn't really get along with them because they're kind of, too good for him. So he connects with the skin horse, and the skin horse is this mentor to him. It's this older toy at the nursery, and he's been very loved, and so he's a little straggly, and so this conversation is what. This is a conversation between the skin horse and the Velveteen Rabbit. So the skin horse tells the Velveteen Rabbit, real is a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real. Does it hurt? Asked the rabbit. Sometimes, said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. When you're real, you don't mind being hurt. Does it happen all at once like being wound up? He asked her bit by bit. It doesn't happen all at once, said the skin horse. You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily or have sharp edges or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you're real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all because once you're real, you can't be ugly except to people who don't understand. So, this is going to guide us into our first time of reflection. So I'm going to be asking, with two groups of 2 or 3, or maybe, we'll table however you want to kind of pair up. We're going to be chatting about this question together. What's made you real? What's made you real? What are those things in your life, that suffering, some of those woundings that you've gone through, and I understand that's a really big question, so you don't have to share too much, but what are some experiences that you've gone through in your life that have been difficult, that have been some of those things that you carry on your human path? So, discuss.
I have this great list. I'm just going to write it down so I don't mess it up.
Okay, Is there anyone who would like to share, keeping in mind that this is being recorded? No, you don't have to, but anyone want to throw anything out? It's a big question, right? Yeah, I can say for myself that part of what's made me real is my own experiences of mental illness in my life, both lived and in the lives of people that I love. So that's one thing for me. So moving in into our second question that we're going to explore together, what happens if we don't tend to our wounds, right? So we've established, okay, we're all human, we're all walking this path where we have these different woundings, these different hurts and sufferings we go through. It has the potential to help us be real, help us move closer to God and closer to others and closer to the people that we are ministering to. How do we do that? What happens if we don't tend to our own wounds? So first, Christ says in John 15, 5 and 6, I'm the vine, you're the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you're like a branch that is thrown away and withers. So we could say that we might wither. Father John Bear says, only if we die to ourselves in this way can we be recreated to live in the paradise at the center of which stands the wood of the cross. Only if we give ourselves totally to Christ will we find that his yoke is light. If we try to remain in control, if we only go halfway, then the cross will always be an unacceptable burden, no matter how little it is that we're prepared to accept. And Father Stephen Muse, again, whom we just heard, similarly discusses how Jesus' yoke is easy because it fits him exactly, and he takes it all the way. He accepts it all the way. So one of the things that, what that could look like for me, right, is if I start verging into, I'm such a smart counselor, and and getting really attached to these outcomes, with the people that I'm serving, then I'm really, I'm only kind of half-heartedly carrying the yoke, and all of a sudden it starts to feel really heavy. We might burn out. So, for those of you who here has heard of the ProQual, the Professional Quality of Life? Okay, you're going to have to, there's so many resources you're going to have to check out after this. So, Professional Quality of Life is an instrument that measures burnout. It's free. You go online, and you don't have to, you don't have to make an account or anything. You just download it and take it, and it measures burnout. So it measures compassion fatigue, and this instrument kind of identifies these two scales of burnout and then secondary traumatic stress. So burnout looks like hopelessness, disconnectedness, exhaustion, and overwhelm, and then secondary traumatic stress. Preoccupation with thoughts about a client, patient, or parishioner, whomever you're serving, who here has had like a stress dream about work or about a client, or yeah, that's some secondary traumatic stress coming home with you. Struggles to separate home life with identity as a helper, hypervigilance, right? Feeling trapped or feeling on edge, feeling like I'm waiting for the other foot to drop kind of thing. So secondary traumatic stress is this idea that it actually looks like post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, and it's connected to specifically the people who we're serving. So if we are not tending to our wounds, this might look like burnout. How many folks have seen burnout, whether that's in you or someone you love? Yeah, I know, this work is hard, holy moly. So we may carry a compulsive cross. What else what this might look like if we don't tend to our wounds. So Father Stephen Muse describes a compulsive cross as caretaking out of an inner need to manage an unpredictable environment rooted in childhood experiences, right? So kiddo, parent is, there's an unpredictable kind of environment in the home, right? Parent has mental illness, parent has substance use, other factors that are going on. The kid learns, in order to be safe, I gotta make sure mom or dad is okay. And kind of steps into this caretaking role to try to have that safety themselves. Then, kiddo grows up and loves to help others and wants to be a counselor or a priest, and But if we're caretaking out of that young place, that young, like, I need to help somebody be okay so that I can be okay, then that's going to be us carrying a compulsive cross rather than actually carrying our true cross.
Excuse me. What book this Father Stephen used that you're quoting? Is it a specific name of the book?
When Hearts Become Flame.
Oh.
Yes. Yeah, great question. Yeah, When Hearts Become Flame. Yeah, which is dog-eared, and I love that book so very much. It's just I think a seminal text for me, and what it is to try to integrate that faith, our faith, with the work. Coming from an internal family systems model, which I won't go into a ton here, but I did want to shout out Presbytera Julie Honeycutt and Joel Claypack. They both have some beautiful work on this in their OCAMPR talks from 2019 and 2022 respectively on integrating IFS with our Orthodox faith. An internal family systems model, just in brief, is that, right, there's this self energy, and I'm not a theologian by training, but how I think about it for myself is that's like my nous, like that's like the faculty, right, that's like the image of God in me, that is helping me to be present with my client, truly have that authentic encounter that Father Stephen was just talking about. And meanwhile, we all have these parts, and they're not bad. They just carry these burdens, right? So this image is an interactive card. So here I've got Sharon Sargent Eckstein and Backwoods Press 2012. It's this deck of cards I carry it around in my purse. I use it with my clients. And this is my part. This is how I represent my caretaker part, right? This part, it really, really, really wants to help, and it's also really bad at boundaries of, like, I'm staying late at work, or I'm kind of overworking, overfunctioning. And that's part of how I know, that this part is up for me. So this is another way for us to think about if I'm in myself, that's that compassion, curiosity, creativity, calm, courage. And if I'm in this part, right, then I'm kind of carrying a burden, and I'm actually serving out of a burden or like an unhealed wound. And instead of turning towards, myself and really taking care of myself so that then I can actually show up better, much more real for the people that I'm working with. And Christ invites us to lay down that cross so that we can actually pick it up. Metropolitan Anthony Bloom has said, as long as we ourselves are real, as long as we are truly ourselves, God can be present and can do something with us. But the moment we try to be what we're not, we've become a fictitious personality, an unreal presence, and this unreal presence cannot be approached by God. He also quotes someone in that same book, Beginning to Pray, that says something like, God can save the sinner you are, but not the saint you pretend to be. And so I think about that as well, right? If I'm serving out of a part, out of that compulsive cross, that's kind of me pretending to be a saint instead of me just, I'm a sinner and this is how I'm doing the work that I need to do to, as much as I can, get myself out of the way so that God can show up. Okay, so reflection number 2. What are your telltale signs of compassion fatigue and burnout? Or what do other people in your life see when you start to burn out or have compassion fatigue? Because often it's our loved ones who see it in us first before we see it ourselves. Discuss. Anyone want to share?
Yeah. I was going to say overwhelmed. And thoughts going through my mind 1,000 ways from Sunday, and I'm trying to focus on what I'm doing. It might be something that I usually love, doing, but I just can't. The words don't make sense anymore, so I got to step back and I can't focus.
Overwhelmed thoughts, kind of racing. You used to love something, and you're like, it's not really.
This is too heavy for me now.
Yeah, other quotes resonate with that. You're gonna have to give it just a little bit more. As you heard with teenage boys, and I specialize in making them therapeutically. Talk about their feelings. Yes.
I can add that if I don't pause when that overwhelm appears, then I get snippy, I lose patience, I don't bring my very best to the encounter if I don't take a pause somehow. Yeah.
What's your name again?
Aziza.
Yeah. Thanks you all. Okay, so what does it look like to tend to our wounds? And I will say that these next slides are kind of dense because there's so much goodness out there that it was hard to, narrow it down. But happy to send my slides afterwards, and hopefully this will be available through our OCAMPR portal. But and there's a bibliography at the end. So, okay, who here has heard of Nexus? Okay, so I'm introducing you all to so many wonderful things. So Nepsis is this idea of watchfulness. This is an idea from the church fathers, and I don't want to speak too much on it because I'm a counselor by training, and so I don't want to misrepresent it. So I'm just going to read how Father Stephen Freeman describes it, which is that the nature of watchfulness is the awareness of the true self and the transformation into the image of Christ. The goal of watchfulness at every moment is union with God, and with God through all creation. It's only in perceiving all things in communion with God that we see the truth of all things. This is wakefulness. And St. Isaac the Syrian says the soul is restored to health by silence. It's therefore necessary to train oneself to silence, and this is a labor that brings sweetness to the heart. It is through silence that a man reaches peace from unwanted thoughts. And so, kind of like how Father Stephen Freeman, how Father Stephen Muse, and also Dr. Albert Rossi, and also so many wonderful folks have said that we have to have silence in our lives. We have to cultivate stillness, because it's through that stillness that we're able to actually, right, the thoughts are racing in my head, that I'm able to not even necessarily still my thoughts. I can't really do that, but it's more like, can I slow myself down enough to notice, to be mindful, to kind of watch what's going on inside of me, inside of myself, and just cultivating that awareness. I lead a dialectical behavioral therapy skills group, and one of the kind of core foundations of that model is mindfulness, and that's really the cornerstone of all of it, and of most growth in therapy, I think, because if we don't realize something's happening, then we can't really do anything about it. And so, and I love how, wisdom from today is telling us things that we've already known since, our early church fathers, that we need to cultivate our inner life by creating that silence so that we can watch ourselves with compassion and go, okay. And as St. Paisius says, try to not let our thoughts, that logismi, land. Like, don't give it an airport. He says, thoughts are like airplanes flying in the air. If you ignore them, there's no problem. If you pay attention to them, you create an airport inside your head and permit them to land. So I definitely have airports inside my head at different times of life, some more than others. And also just wanted to briefly name drop Dan Siegel, whose work around neuroplasticity, his book Mind Sight, talks about how we can literally change our brains by how we direct our attention. And so what fires together, wires together. So when you direct that attention inside your brain, and right, when you're learning a new coping skill or whatever it is, like it's like there's a well-trodden path, and instead of, my client, right, instead of, now I'm punching a wall because I'm so angry, it's like, okay, we got to start this other road, kind of like Father Simon said, where first there's no road and it's super bumpy, and you're like, okay, instead of punching a wall, can you stop, take a deep deep breath, check in with your body, or even just close your eyes and sit down, like whatever it takes, because when you're in that fight or flight, it's pretty hard to think that much at all, right? Because this is our wizard brain and our lizard brain, our emotion brain. It's pretty hard to do things from an emotion brain place. So prayer is not just, watching ourselves, that watchfulness, that nepsis, that being with Christ in each moment. It's also crying out to God, telling him all of our thoughts. Henry Nouwen has this beautiful passage. I think this one is out of Spiritual Direction. I'll have to double check. But where he talks about, right, it's all of it, all of like crying out to God, raging, how dare you do this to me? This is so hard, right? All the deep prayers in the Psalms of people crying out to God, and I don't know. Sometimes I can feel like am I allowed to say that? But it's like we cultivate that deep familiarity and intimacy with God, and it's just like whatever is human, whatever is real, when God is there for all of that. And this image right here by an artwork by Marc Chagall titled Solitude, it's a rabbi meditating on the Torah, and then this cow beside him is there because a similar kind of way to translate the Hebrew word for meditate is to chew the cud, because kind of like how we say ruminate, but not exactly, right? Because it's ruminate is sort of a different thing, but we chew the cud, right? I've hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. And so how do we kind of cultivate that in ourselves? We tend to our wounds by ascesis, by ascetic labor. And that looks different for each one of us, right? Prayer and fasting. I'm personally in recovery from disordered eating, so I don't fast like how you would traditionally think about it. And so for each of us, that kind of looks different. So Origen says that each one of our souls contains a well of living water. It has in it a buried image of God. It's this well that the hostile powers have blocked up with earth. But now that our Isaac, Christ, has come, let us welcome his coming and dig out our wells, clearing the earth from them, cleansing from all defilement. We shall find living water in them, the water of which the Lord says, "He who believes in me, out of his heart shall flow rivers of living water." So, I think about this work of cultivating my inner life and cultivating myself as like, God, can you just clear out all the gunk, clear out all of it so that I can show up, deeper and more really and more authentically with the person I'm serving, so that, right, the water, the living water of God can move through me more easily, and I'm getting myself out of the way. Doing without doing, I think, is how Father Stephen Muse just put it. Getting myself out of the way so that I can actually meet my client that I'm serving. Also, embodiment. Highly recommend this text specifically, Try Softer by Andi Kolber, for a really beautiful integration of trauma therapy and Christianity, or Christian faith. She comes from an evangelical background. I think that her approach is really good and beautiful. And she's also a trauma survivor herself. So I think that brings an added warmth and realness to the work, because, right, it's like this is what she's living. It's not just, I know about this and I'm talking about it, but I'm truly living it. So part of what has been so healing for me, converting to Orthodoxy from a Protestant background, is that just this really robust theology around that we are bodies and souls, and it's an integrated whole. And so, like the sacraments, it's not just that I'm thinking about God, right? I'm meeting him through matter, through the physical matter. And so part of how we can tend to our wounds is engaging fully in all the sacraments of our church. Confession, communion, holy unction. And not just that, but seeing God in each moment of our lives. So Father Stephen Freeman says that we live in an altar, that it's not just, right, that everything, every moment that we walk through our lives is an opportunity to meet God. I think that addressing the body as well is extremely important for folks who have experienced trauma, right, and are kind of dissociated, like walking heads, and are super connected to their bodies. Just because, like, that's how do we reconnect them right into their body where they can experience the present moment with their bodies, their emotions, what's going through them, and see God in that, instead of sort of just this conceptual understanding of who God is. I personally prescribe myself with my spiritual father. I call it a discipline of gentleness, because, with a history of scrupulosity and tendency towards legalism, it's like mine doesn't, it's like I have to just be incredibly gentle with myself, and that's just how I try to show up with the folks that I serve as well. So. Cultivating community, it's like we have to have these, just a robust community of folks to support us in doing this work, because it's hard. We're meeting people in vulnerable, painful, isolated, distressed places. And we need these relationships around us to humble us, and not, I'm Lydia, the really smart counselor, and then whatever. And then I come home and it's like, okay, like, I need to show up as a human and just be reminded of, from my family and from my husband, who I am. It reminds us that we're chosen, beloved, and blessed. So deep friendship is a calling forth of each other's chosenness and a mutual affirmation of being precious in God's eyes. That's Henry Nouwen. It refreshes us, like we need to see ourselves, our goodness, and who we are reflected back to us from other people. And then also create places of safety where we can process the wounds and stress of the world and our work with transparency and emotional availability. All right, so we'll just, because we're running close to time, we'll just kind of shout out a few things. What disciplines, what do you guys practice that nourishes and rejuvenates you? What are some things you do to nourish and rejuvenate yourself in the work? Running! Yeah, physical movement.
One thing that works for me.
Mm-hmm. Other folks, yeah.
Biking.
Biking, yes.
Being outside.
Outdoor nature.
A very cold shower.
Cold shower. You are braver than I am.
Well, I start off with a warm shower.
Oh, okay.
And then I turn it to cold, and it's a little easier that way.
Yeah.
I can't just walk into a cold shower.
Yeah. You're still braver than I am. Yeah. Who here? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think for me, especially connecting to the aspect of being gentle with yourself is, maybe it's not silly, but like watching TV. So I really like watching TV.
Sure.
So it can be very easy for me to basically binge and use it as a
Right.
way to avoid something.
Right.
But then sometimes the overcorrection is, therefore I should never
Mm-hmm.
watch. I can always be studious. Should always be studious. I should always get through things. And sort of recognizing that downtime, play, like you have on the slide, like that's okay. Maybe it can be holy.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other folks. Anyone like to create? I'm an artist. Anybody else? Well, or even if you're not an artist, right? You can be an artist just because you create something. But for me, that's one way that I come back to myself. Yeah. Any other knitting or handwork or?
I like to do things where I'm forced to be present to what I'm doing. Like, there's two things that come to my mind. One is grooming my dog, and the other is playing piano. Because when I'm grooming my dog, I have to be present to that. And same with piano, I can't be anywhere else.
Yeah.
So those are activities where I can't multitask.
Yeah.
It helps me to slow down.
Yes. Anybody else have an activity where it's engages your full attention and so you lose track of time? It's like watercolors for me. Yeah.
Gardening.
Learning.
Gardening.
Gardening. Yes. Oh, what do you garden?
In pots.
In pots. Flowers? Are you
grow vegetables?
Gardening without a garden. Gardening without a garden. Me too. I have succulents because that's the only thing I can keep alive. Just kidding. Okay. Well, thank you all. Okay. So, winding down together, our final question: what is hospitality of the heart? So, when I learned that the theme of this conference was sacred hospitality, this is immediately what came to me, is hospitality of the heart, as is kind of described in Henry Nouwen's work, The Wounded Healer, which we're about to jump into. Okay. So, hospitality of the heart, Father Stephen Muse says that we lift up the gifts of creation each moment from the altar of the heart. Again, we just heard him talking about the altar of the heart, right? And so hospitality of the heart, we can see it as bringing our whole selves, all of our life to God in each moment and remembering Christ in all things. And so this is how we can be a royal priesthood. So in 1 Peter 2:9 it says, "You're a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." It's practicing gratitude in each moment. And Father Stephen Freeman in a Lenten retreat that he did a couple years ago said, "The giving of thanks is humility in the active voice." The giving of thanks is humility in the active voice. So hospitality of the heart, right? It's cultivating that altar, cultivating that space inside of us where we are present with God in each moment. When I'm watching TV, I'm playing, I'm painting my watercolors, I'm going on a walk, I'm running, I'm taking a cold shower, right? It's walking with Christ through all of our life, through all of it. Kind of like in the Divine Liturgy, right, when it says, "Thine own of thine own, we offer unto thee in behalf of all and for all." It's all God's, and I'm, taking all of creation and the people I'm serving, the people I'm helping, and I'm lifting it up to God and saying, may it be blessed. Hospitality of the heart is staying awake with Christ at Gethsemane and remaining with him at the foot of the cross. And so we do this by not dissociating or turning away from suffering with ourselves and with others, right? I have this caretaker part that I talked about earlier. We all have these really young parts of us. How do I turn towards her? Take her and say, "Okay, sweetie, it's gonna be okay. What do you need?" So that you can take a step over here, and let me show up to my client. And not be projecting my stuff onto my client. And so it's remaining with Christ at the cross. It's not not falling asleep as the disciples did at Gethsemane. It's staying with that suffering. I am down in the mud. I am down in the mud with my client. I am listening to the terrible things that they have gone through, and I am not turning away. I am moving closer, I'm moving towards them. So Henry Nouwen says, when one has the courage to enter where life is experienced is most unique and most private, one touches the soul of the community. And so by meeting God in my most particular, the most particular place, in my most vulnerable, my most, my own stuff, right? By meeting God there, by crying out to him and practicing, that psalm prayer of, where, God, why have you forsaken me? When I can do that work, when I can cultivate my heart, I'm actually touching what's most universal in a way, right? The human experience of loneliness and suffering. So I'm going to end on this quote. It's long and it's all beautiful, so bear with me. Ministers who've come to terms with their own loneliness and are at home in their own houses are hosts who offer hospitality to their guests. They give them a friendly space where they may feel free to come and go, to be close and to be distant, to rest and to play, to talk and to be silent, to eat and to fast. The paradox indeed is that hospitality asks for the creation of an empty space where guests can find their own souls. When they enter a house with real hospitality, they soon see that their own wounds must be understood not as sources of despair and bitterness, but as signs that they have to travel on in obedience to the calling sounds of those wounds. So the question that I would leave with you is, how are you going to cultivate that space in yourself? How are you going to make room at the altar of your own heart so that you can have that space to better meet the person that is in front of you, that you're ministering to, your parishioner, your client, your patient. So thank you all very much for your wonderful thoughts and presence today. It's again truly a pleasure to be with all of you. And now I think I have time for a couple questions or comments.
What was the picture in the previous slide? What was going on there?
This is The Return of the Prodigal Son by Rembrandt. Yeah, great question. Yeah, here, I feel like we've got I love Rembrandt. So this is the father welcoming back the son. Yeah. Questions or thoughts? Again, I make teenage boys talk, so you guys are gonna have to jump in.
So hospitality of the heart, that when you're using that phrase, is something that is just like that we need to attend to in ourselves, or something that we are sharing with others, or
Yes.
both components.
Yeah. Thank you. Great question. So hospitality of the heart, right? Henry Nouwen is saying that with prayer, with stillness, adding in Father Stephen Freeman's work, right? It's also those relationships around us, that embodiment, that play, that movement, that rest, that we're connected with our bodies. We're creating this space in ourselves to then be able to invite in like a guest. Okay? And so if I can cultivate that inner awareness, that watchfulness, then I'm making that space inside myself so that I'm not in my own way. I'm not acting out of this caretaker part, but I'm actually like meeting the person that I'm serving. Does that make sense?
Yes. So it's kind of like the first one and then the other.
It's like first one and the other, because I do think it's also like, as Father Stephen just said, it's like there's something ontological that's like both of us, that is like that sacred, that healing encounter, and I'm also, and this isn't necessarily like the focus of what I've talked about today, but I'm also like a guest in their house. In a way, when they're sharing this story with me, they're letting me in, and I'm walking in and sitting with them, and so it's almost like this liminal like space, this like meeting of me and my client. That's how I think about it. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that first question that you asked, what makes you real?
Yeah.
There was something that came to my mind, that I shared with the table that I wasn't willing to share in the room until you said that you have suffered with mental illness as well. And so immediately I was like, I wanted to share, because I have bipolar disorder. I suffer with bipolar disorder, and that was something too deep, too hard that I thought, I couldn't share. But as soon as you were vulnerable and open like that, then that created a space for me to feel vulnerable and open, even in this space. And so I just really appreciate you mentioning that, being open with that, and creating a space for that vulnerability. And then to hear that you go through DBT and have skills group, like that's the therapy that I went through. That's been so helpful.
DVDs.
Yeah, yeah.
Loving some good DVDs.
Yeah. And I actually have, shared this a lot with the catechumens and the choirs because I'm a catechism director at our church. And I'm always talking about mindfulness and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, where is this in the Fathers? Where is this in the Fathers? And, yeah. So, I mean, this whole conference has kind of been about this. I've been picking up on all of this. So it's been very helpful. So I just want to say thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that's like that right there, right? Like, oh, I don't want to share. And then I'm initiating with some vulnerability. You all are initiating with vulnerability. I'm, in some of the most vulnerable, most lonely parts. Like appropriately. We always do self-disclosure appropriately, but I like to normalize, like, oh yeah, when I feel really angry and my clients are like, you feel angry? I'm like, oh yes, I feel angry. And this is what it looks like, and it gives them that permission to then be able to share, oh, well, I feel angry too.
Yeah.
Or I feel shame, and everybody, like the humanity, the universal humanity aspect of it. So that's me meeting God in that particularity. And by that, it's opening the door for that other person. I'm acquainted with how that has shaped me, how being a human and experiencing these woundings has shaped me. Because I have that, then I'm able to appropriately share, not needing something from my client for me to feel better, but like, yeah, this is part of my story, so that then they feel like, oh, I think I can lay all my things out here too, and we can, in this space together, learn, like, what do I want to do with this, and who do I want to be?
Yeah.
One more question? Okay. Oh.
What about two more?
Mine is real fast.
Sure.
You mentioned about we can change our brain. Do you have a resource for more information on that?
Yes, Dan Siegel, Mind Sight, 2010, I think. Here, let's see. Let's check that out. Siegel 2020, transform your brain with the new science of kindness. Yes, so that would be a really great resource for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Mine was just a quick comment. In graduate school, I did a wounded healers training, and it's, secular, and so this is the first time doing a wounded healers training from a Christian or Orthodox Christian perspective, and I just want to thank you because it was great and more impactful than before, and I think it will help me for my own self-care and then just for the work that I'm doing with clients, because I often use self-disclosure when it's clinically appropriate, but now that I'm having more conversations about faith with people, I'm using examples, from my own life. So anyway, I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Okay, everybody.